Hello, everyone.
Hey guys, on today's podcast, we're going to be talking about implements.
But before we do that, we want to remind you to hit that like button. It lets us know if you're enjoying our content. And lastly, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because when you do, it makes me smile.
If you want to get bonus content, dive deeper into the topic of domestic discipline, the best place to do that is over on our Patreon. So link to our Patreon is down below.
So this is going to be, I feel like, a really fun, not that they're all not fun, but a really fun podcast today, because we're going to be talking about implements that we no longer use, sadly.
Yeah, we thought that we would go through, kind of talk about common spanking implements, talk through things that we've tried that we no longer use and why. Not to say that they're not good to use, just
Exactly.
the reasons why we decided to move off of those implements. Also go through implements that we have decided to use and why, and kind of talk through maybe some other common implements that we haven't used or haven't used in a really long time, and kind of talk through that. If you have looked for implements, done any research in that area, you know that the list is as long as you want it to be.
It's pretty crazy how long it can get.
And so we are obviously not going to talk through every single implement that has ever existed. So
the first one that we'll start with is this bad boy right here. It's leather. This is real leather, isn't it?
it is.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
It's a leather paddle.
Yep.
We have to be very descriptive because not everyone is going to see.
Yeah.
I will post pictures for the podcast-only listeners, but if you want to get the video form of this podcast, see it as we are talking in real time, our patrons do get access to video. So just FYI. But yes, it's a real leather paddle.
And this for us just didn't seem to work for a bunch of different reasons. But I think the biggest one for me was I just didn't feel like it had any type of
Impact?
Yeah, I was going to say impact or sting to it. It just was kind of there.
I would agree with that. It can sting, and it can leave some impact. However, this particular leather paddle, it has a metal core to it. So,
yes,
and that just is to give it structure and some weight. But because of just the way that it's made, or maybe the way that I react to leather, it just wasn't leaving that like lasting sensation that we were looking for. And it kind of got to the point where you could kind of go as hard as you wanted with that. And it was barely making a difference.
Barely doing that. And because of the metal core that she was talking about as well, it got to the point where there were moments where I was like, I can't, like, I'm having a hard time not getting my wrist fatigued and everything else. And
it does have some weight to it.
It does. This is actually, I mean, I wouldn't call it light, but I wouldn't call it heavy either. It's kind of somewhere in the middle. But if you use it, it does get tiring if you're having to use it for more than, I would say, a couple minutes.
And because of the metal core, the handle was bending as you were using it too. Yeah. And this is, I mean, it's a nice piece. It's a nice piece of craftsmanship.
It is.
But because of it bending, I didn't want it to break either. And so it just wasn't a good fit for punishments for us. Not
the best necessarily. And then, the next paddle is this guy right here.
We got this from a friend because it didn't work for them, and I was like, well, I want to try it. I've never tried a thin acrylic paddle.
No, we had never tried one.
This is a very thin, like 1/4 of an inch thin acrylic paddle.
See, and for those of you who are on video, you can see there.
And it does sting. I'm not going to say that it feels like nothing, but it has absolutely no lasting impact whatsoever. And I felt like you were getting frustrated with it.
I was, and we had 2 of these, and one just broke.
At the handle.
And that was because the reason I was getting frustrated with it is it was kind of like the last paddle. I had to put a lot into it, and the moment I started putting a ton of effort into it, that's when it broke. It just wasn't good for the sustainability of it.
Yeah, we thought that it would work maybe for more sensitive areas like my thighs. And it did sting. Like I said, it did sting, but it had absolutely like no lasting effect, no impact. And yeah, you were getting frustrated, and I think the moment you got frustrated and you started really kind of like
That's when
putting
it, yeah, that's right. That's when it broke.
the other one broke.
So it just wasn't, which was kind of surprising.
We are a fan of acrylic paddles, so that was surprising, but definitely the thinner acrylic paddles, not really for us.
Now this one looks maybe intimidating. This aluminum. This is aluminum, right?
It's
no,
not
steel.
aluminum. It's
I always want to
steel.
call it aluminum, but it is stainless steel. It looks intimidating, but it just really wasn't for you, was it?
It bruises pretty significantly. It does,
right?
Because it is super heavy.
There's the thickness for those of you watching, right there. So
it is a really heavy paddle. This was actually one of the first paddles that we bought specifically for spanking.
Yeah.
And we wanted something that had some weight to it because what we were using before was so lightweight that it was just not effective at all. Which I guess we can talk about next because we actually got rid of that one.
Yeah, we can talk about that one next.
But this was the first implement that we really bought once we started domestic discipline. And I went with the stainless steel version because I wanted something heavier, but that ended up being a detriment.
Yep.
It bruises, like I said, it bruises really easily. It does leave lasting soreness.
It does,
I will say that.
Yep.
It's not an ineffective paddle.
It wasn't, no.
However, it wasn't sustainable for our discipline system.
You want to talk about when I was talking about earlier that fatigued my arm and my wrist, and it's because this has some weight to it. I mean, it is obviously it's steel, so it is very, very heavy.
It's almost 2 pounds, and if you think about the motion of spanking and doing that for a solid 5, 10, 15, even 20 minutes.
Absolutely.
It's a workout. Honestly, that would be a really good paddle to use for training purposes.
That's true. That's a good point to kind of strengthen the wrist and the arm. But yeah, this was fatiguing me when we were using it, and we couldn't get through most of the punishment.
The maker of this paddle does offer an aluminum version that if we did want to buy a metal paddle in the future, I would probably look into that one because it is much more lightweight. But we just decided to move away from metal paddles after this experiment. So the next one that we will mention, but we don't actually have it with us, but I'll find a picture and insert it. But it is the paddle that we were using before the metal paddle, and that was a very kind of larger wooden paddle. It was kind of like, I guess you would call it like a fraternity style paddle.
It's probably a good
probably a good description.
Yeah, probably.
It was made out of pine. It was the very first paddle we ever bought.
Yes.
And we did buy that before we officially started domestic discipline. So when we started domestic discipline, we started with that paddle, but it just was not very effective. And
that one, I don't even know how to describe it. It didn't fatigue my wrist and arm, but I also felt like I couldn't get enough
force.
Yes, exactly. That's the word. I couldn't get enough force with it. It just was in this weird middle area for me.
Now, there are people that love wooden paddles, but the type of wood that's used for the paddle really does matter. And
we did find that out. Yes.
And to get a high quality wooden paddle, it's kind of expensive. So instead of trying to find the wood that would work for us and trying to find a paddle maker that would make something really well balanced, because that was the other thing, this particular paddle wasn't super well balanced.
Well balanced, yep.
It was just a very inexpensive paddle. It was made out of an inexpensive wood, and it just the care of craftsmanship was good for the price point, but it wasn't the type of craftsmanship that you can find within that world. So we decided that we didn't want to necessarily play that game of trying to find a high quality wood, trying to find a dense wood, trying to find a really good maker that could make something super well balanced. And so we just decided to move off of wooden paddles at that point. We did get the metal paddle, and when the metal paddle seemed to be really tiring or
Tiring is a good
cumbersome. We decided to try to find something that was lightweight, that would be really, really stingy, and that is when we got,
Ta-da!
This is the very first paddle that we got from the maker that we still use paddles from.
Who does a great job, by
Yes.
the way. Great job.
This is a 1/2-inch acrylic paddle. This is from, I'll link the Etsy shop down below because we really do like his work, and it's very well made.
And so if you're looking for a paddle, we want you to buy it from him because he does a great job.
But this particular paddle is called the Jet. And it was the first one we bought, and I bought it because I thought it would be more quiet because of the kind of the style with the large cutout in the middle. I don't think it's any more quiet than the other paddles we have.
Not really. It's about the same.
It's about the same, but it's a nice shape.
And it's very lightweight. And the other reason we went with acrylic as well was in our space, it's not climate controlled. And so the other thing that we were running into, like with the leather and with the wood and stuff, is that if we didn't take it in, if we had forgotten it out here, it could ruin. Acrylic doesn't need climate control. So that's another reason why this is such a good paddle.
That ended up being like a benefit after the fact because we did buy this before we moved to this house.
That's right, we did. Gosh, he goes all the way back.
It's like he's been with us for a while. But
he's an old friend.
I wanted something that could be used over the knee or in other positions. And this was a really good option because it's not a super long paddle. The shape is kind of nice for over the knee. If you're looking for that, it is very, very stingy.
It is.
It's very, very effective. And honestly, we would still use it if we didn't find that we preferred the paddle.
This would still be if somebody said of our current paddles collections that we use, you can't take those. But out of the ones we're showing you today, you're going to be on a desert island. You can only have one. We probably would choose this guy.
Actually, yes.
Would be at least in the top 2 that we might choose. So
one thing I do like about this is it gives you options. Obviously, it's designed for this to be the smaller side to be the handle.
Yeah.
But you could, in theory, use the handle as the surface.
Yep.
As the thing making contact.
It is, like I said, if we didn't have some right now that we just like slightly more, we still would be using this. This is still a great paddle.
Really is a great paddle. It's just something that we just don't prefer as much as what we're using.
And here's another one that we used to use a lot, and we still like it, but it's just not used as much.
I do need to clean it.
I was like, sorry, I didn't realize it was a little dirty. But it's another acrylic as well, made by the same
by the same maker. Like I said, I'll leave a link to his Etsy shop.
There's the thickness there.
This particular paddle is called the Over the Knee Tearjerker, and it is aptly named. It's very, I mean, it's really good for over the knee because of the size and shape. It's very stingy. It's very effective. It leaves a nice lingering sensation on the skin.
that was a good word. It's a good word.
But why did we stop using this one?
Well, the longer acrylic, which if I move my head, you can see it right there.
The longer acrylic is the tearjerker.
Yeah, that one's called the tearjerker. This one, just for our purposes right now, is just, it's become that. It's kind of a real nice multi-purpose paddle, and it just seems to have more of an effect than this one. And also, this one seemed to fatigue my wrist just a little more than this one. Not by much, but just enough where I could really tell the difference. And we found that the length with this one is a little better for how we've got our punishments and corrections structured, to where we just didn't really need this guy so much
because
anymore.
of the position that I'm in. It was harder for you to make sure that you were making contact.
That's true too.
with a very flat surface with the paddle.
Yeah.
So it was causing a lot of the, like, instead of the whole, like, surface of the paddle making contact with my skin, it was like the last, but just little bit of the paddle was making contact with my skin. And so all of the force of the swat was coming out right there.
Yep.
And it was starting to cause my skin to react very poorly.
Very poorly to it. And so, you know, what we've always talked about on here is, like, you know, you're going to probably have bruising. You're going to probably have some things happen. But that's not what you're trying to strive for. You really want to protect, you want to get the point across, but protect the skin as best you can.
And it's not that, I was just bruising. It was really that my skin was starting to kind of like,
almost like
blister.
Yeah, that's the word.
And it was just causing more damage than what would be expected to be normal for us, at least.
Yep.
I bruise pretty easily. So
she does.
Bruising is not something that we concern ourselves with, but it's really like the integrity of, like, the skin itself is what we want to protect.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why we moved away from that one. But so now moving away from paddles, other implements that we have tried in the past. Good old Mr. Wooden Spoon.
I know some of you may laugh about this, but, you know, it's a good old wooden spoon.
Most people that I've talked to start with wooden spoons at some point in their domestic discipline.
Yeah, this one's pretty long, too.
This one is a long one. I got this actually at, like, Ross or TJ Maxx, one of the two.
It was one of those stores.
It was a whole $5 for this spoon.
High dollar one here, you know.
But the reason why a lot of people start with wooden spoons is because they're readily available. They are inexpensive and they're quite effective. This guy was kind of a lot to take, honestly.
Remember, he was not your friend.
No,
you did not like him necessarily.
And honestly, wooden spoons can be highly, highly effective. And this really was very, very effective as a spanking implement. It was very stingy, but we moved off of it for a similar reason that we were just talking about. When Coda increased the intensity of my spankings, we found that the grain of the spoon. Now this one is a very inexpensive spoon, so the grain goes up and, like, through the spoon, and it was starting to show signs of cracking, the spoon itself, and the grain of the wood was starting to just irritate my skin. It was like, because of the impact, it was almost causing, like, kind of a friction burn after my spankings.
Yep. Friction burn is a good way to describe that. That's really what it was.
Because it wasn't breaking skin. I wasn't bleeding or anything like that during the spanking itself. Coda is obviously very aware of that and would, you know. And
encourage, you know, all head of households, be aware of that. Always be aware of that.
And if something like that were to happen, he would either end the spanking or he would adjust drastically to avoid making that worse.
Absolutely.
And so he wasn't seeing anything happen during the spanking itself, but after the spanking, as my, you know, body was kind of recovering from the spanking, it was creating a lot of, like, surface damage to my skin because of the grain of the wood. Yep.
And it wasn't doing it too much, but it was starting to splinter a little bit here too, which was just, you know, just part of use because it's, you know, kind of an inexpensive spoon. So that's, I mean, it just happens.
If you, now, obviously this is just a very run-of-the-mill spoon. If you want to use wooden spoons, olive wood or teak is, or pica are better choices for common wooden spoons. And you can still find those at, like, Home Goods, TJ Maxx, Walmart,
just
Target.
Figure it, or get it, make sure the tag's on it so you can tell what it is.
Just look and see what it's made out of. Those are better choices for wooden spoons. They don't necessarily splinter as much.
There you go.
They don't split as often. However, we decided, because we did have a wooden spoon that was teak, I believe.
Oh, did we?
Mm-hmm. And we used it, but you just didn't prefer it.
Yeah, I think I remember the one that you're talking about. I think I remember it. Yeah.
And just because it was kind of on the smaller side.
Yeah.
And we We used it a few times, but you gravitate towards. Coda's a creature of habit, so once
I am very much so.
once he finds what he likes, he gravitates towards that and doesn't necessarily veer off of that too much. And then the next one, this was a good old Amazon find. These were sold as,
You can see the thicknesses of them there.
Like horse crops is technically what they were sold as.
Yes, yeah.
But I would describe them as a flat cane.
Yeah, it's basically what they are.
And that's what I kind of expected them to feel like.
There's the bases of them.
I expected it to feel like a cane. However, it does not.
No. In fact, when I touch these two, they're not, I don't think, but they almost feel like wood.
No, I think they're plastic.
Yeah, but they almost feel like wood to me. I don't know why, but yeah, they just had a different sensation for both of us. Mm-hmm. Really.
This was another one that when we used it the first time, you were cautious, and I kept telling you, like, because anytime we get a new implement, we do kind of an experimental spanking where Kodo will give me a few swats with the implement, and I tell him, like, okay, you can go more intense. And we kind of do that until I'm like, okay, that's good. And then you take it about 2 steps further
right.
and you actually use it.
Yeah. Yep. Because I figure out where her threshold is, basically.
Yeah, and where I tap out is usually at least a step under what I can actually take. And then you try to go just a step above
just
that.
Just a step above that, right? Exactly.
And so when we were doing our experimental spanking with these, you started and I was like, you can go more. And it's almost like I never got to the point where it was like, oh, that actually feels like a legitimate swat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they just weren't. And these, again, when I would get to the point where she almost would be like, oh, that almost feels like a legitimate swat.
You were hitting so hard.
So hard.
That you felt like it was going to break.
Not only that it was going to break, but I could feel from my wrist all the way up to my arm, like this vibration. And it was like, this is just isn't good.
Now, I have heard that if you use these like on the upper thigh, that you can get a pretty good sensation. However, why use, like, this is just the logic that we use. Why use something inferior when you have something like a cane at your disposal?
Right, exactly.
That will give a similar, not even similar, a superior sensation. And yeah, so we kind of, these have collected dust for almost a year just because they were a failed experiment.
They're just kind of there. They're just kind of there. These are probably better suited for a Ninja Turtle.
That would be fun. Costume prop.
A little costume prop for Ninja Turtle. But anyway.
So what have we landed on?
So the first thing we've landed on is this long acrylic right here. As you can see, it's pretty much the same thickness as the other one that you saw, but nice and long, still has the holes. This is the tear jerker.
This is the tear jerker. It's a 1/2 inch thick acrylic with holes drilled throughout.
As you can see. Yep.
And so you like the balance of this.
I love this one because I've not gotten any wrist fatigue with this at all. I feel like I have more control over the snap that I'm able to give here. And I like how long it is because I feel like I can just control the surface a little better. Making it more flat is what I'm trying to say, to land more flat. So I really like this one.
Yeah, you have really perfected the ability to kind of like land that one very flat. So the sensation is being evenly distributed throughout the surface.
Yep. So this one's kind of become my favorite because, like I said, too, I don't get any wrist fatigue with this one.
This also gives a really nice, like, sensation. Not nice. It gives a very lasting sensation. Like when it makes contact, it's very stingy. It's almost like a burning sensation. But it also like penetrates deep, so that sensation kind of lingers and lasts for quite a while.
Yeah, quite a while. So that's a fun one here.
And then
This is the cane that we currently use. I really like this guy, and I will say, if you start using one of these, I recommend that you practice for a little while, because what you don't want to have is when you hit, have it kind of have that effect. You want it to land precisely here where you're aiming the tip. And so the thing that I had to practice is that if I'm trying to hit a certain spot, that I would aim to hit that certain spot again accurately. Because what you don't want is say, oh, I'm going to aim for that. Okay, try it again, and then it's way over here. And so this, you have to really practice accuracy with this, but this is very effective.
you have gotten very accurate with that, and another like kind of tip to keep in mind is to make sure that you're landing that very flat.
Yes, that's one that that you were talking about. I forgot. You need to land this flat.
If you're landing it, you want the tip to land in like the middle of your target, not like going like off the edge, because
and that's why I say, and that's why I say, practice a lot. I practiced a lot with this, not on Aria, but I practiced on one of the cushion that's behind my back here. I practiced on that a lot with this, to really get the technique down. Mm-hmm. But this has become a really, really good implement because it stings. I mean, Aria will tell you when I hit with this, it stings pretty good, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
It is quite effective. Now this one is a little longer.
I am currently, speaking of practice, I have not used this yet because because since it's longer, I want to practice with this first to figure out how this kind of works, because as you can see, it's a little bit more bendy because of how long it is. It's a
little bit more whippy. So when you were talking about like landing the cane so it doesn't bounce, this will bounce.
Yes.
So you really do want to make sure you're landing it so that you're not snapping it off the skin, because that can cause some.
Exactly. So that's why I'm not ready for this yet. I need some more practice with it. But we'll get there. We'll get there.
We definitely will.
And then, of course, our last one, which actually this may surprise you, this has become one of my favorites as well, is the loop. Now, I practiced with this when I realized it's the same as the small cane that we're using, from the standpoint that you aim for this to be flat. And you try to, this one can flap all over on you if you're not careful too. So you go for the same spot each time, but you want to land it flat.
You don't want to go for the same spot each time.
What I mean is, when you're practicing, you are trying. That's what I should preface. So as you practice with this, what you're wanting to do is flat, and then when you practice, try to aim for the same spot so you can learn accuracy with this, because you have to feel what accuracy looks like. All of these implements that we just showed you, these are based not on your sight necessarily. It's how the feel of it needs to be. And so you've got to get used. The reason I say practice, you've got to get used to the feel on how does it feel when it lands flat? How does it feel when you're practicing and you're hitting the same spot over and over again? How does that feel, so that when you are using it on your taken in hand, you are having the effect that you want and you're not causing that damage and it's not flailing all over the place on you. You got to have the feel.
And there, even with as much practice as you can do, there will still be a learning curve.
Oh yeah.
We definitely had, when we first started using this, a lot of feedback. And because of how Koda was practicing of hitting the same spot for accuracy, he transferred that into our spankings.
Yes.
And hitting the same spot over and over again on your taken in hand is a lot. It's a lot to take. It's very intense.
And not the way you want to do it. So what I've learned is I will move around in an area, but since I've developed that accuracy, I'm able to be more accurate within the whole space.
you're not hitting outside of the like safety zone.
Exactly.
You
That's
are
a great way
only
to say that.
spanking the area that you intend to spank, and you are moving slightly every time so that you're not hitting the exact same spot, unless that's what you intend to do, because two or three in the same spot is okay. I mean,
you just do not
makes a
want,
point.
if you're doing like 20 to 25 of these, you don't want the same spot. Because when we were talking about earlier, you want to get your point across, yes, but you don't want to intentionally cause skin damage, okay? You don't want to do those kind of things. So that's why I say, yeah, 2 or 3 in the same spot, but move it around in what she used a great word, the kind of the safe zone, the safe area. But with these implements, I really want to specify again, practice first, head of households. Practice is what you need first. You do not want to get one of these having never used it and immediately say, we're going to use this in a punishment or correction. That is not a good idea.
Because that's what we did with the loop.
Yep.
And it didn't go well because the shape of it, because of the feel of it, it's very paddle-like. Because it is a braided loop. It's not a true like single loop.
Yep.
It's a braided loop, so it's very paddle-like in the way it's shaped, and so you used it like a paddle.
I did, because I didn't understand the feel. That's why I say this is based on feel. And you got to get the feel.
That was really intense.
It was. It was. And so that's why, learn from our mistakes. It's one reason we're doing this podcast, is to try to help you guys. Do not use these implements straight away. Get some practice in first. Have a feedback session once you feel like you've got the technique. Do a feedback session with your taken in hand, and then you will. But remember, base all of this not on what you visually see. It's based on feel.
Yes.
You've got to get the feel with these.
Because, the feedback that you get as a head of household, the one administering the spanking, the feedback that you get from the implement is completely different.
Completely different.
Between that and a paddle.
So this is really based on sensation. So that's why it takes a while to really learn how to use this, because your eyes can deceive you on how you're using this. That's one thing that I've learned. Real
quick, I forgot to mention one thing that we do not use, and we don't use it so much that I forgot to mention it, is belts or straps, leather straps, anything like that. We just don't use those because it's a personal preference. It is completely fine. They are very, very common. There's a lot of people that really like those implements, but we just don't use them out of personal preference.
And if you use those, you're not wrong. Like, we don't want you to make you feel like you're doing something wrong. We just, for me especially, it's not a preference of mine. I would prefer not to use them.
You like a more rigid implement.
I do, very much so.
You feel like you can control that better, and so that's why it's your preference not to use something that has a lot of give to it. And straps and belts, just by design, have a lot of give, and you just don't really care for that.
But if you have them and you use them and you find them effective, great. We don't want you to think that that's not okay to use. Absolutely. We just always say, within your dynamic, to make sure that they're effective, but also that you're being safe. Because even though there, again, is an agreement here that we have made to do this dynamic, you still want to keep your taken in hand safe. And that's very important.
We tried to strap once, but it just wasn't for you.
No, just wasn't my cup of tea. So.
All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you had fun with this episode. Like I said, I'm going to try to put pictures up for everybody that is listening to the YouTube version of the podcast, so that you can also have the visual of the implements that we have in our collection. But if you want to see us in video, Patreon is where you can go do that.
Go to Patreon.
All patrons get the video content of the public podcast, but if you want the bonus content, then definitely select our middle tier or higher for all of the bonus content as well. But again, hope you enjoyed this, and we will talk to you next time.
See you later.